In 2016, the people of Britain voted to leave the European Union. This brought that state into an era of uncertainty and internal conflict that is unlikely to end anytime soon. Like most of our Oxford colleagues, we supported Remain. But rather than questioning the outcome, we took a step back and asked ourselves, why had it happened? Why was Britain the first state after Greenland to leave the 28-state union? What is so different about Britain? Brexiteers would argue that people voted leave to fulfil the promise of their campaign slogan, to take back control. But just how important is the back bit? Part of the reason the slogan works is that when we were in control of things appeared to be going well and getting better. We really did have control. At its height, the British Empire covered a quarter of the planet's population. Until 1947, Britain had control of over 700 million people, more than any other empire in the history of humankind. As the British Empire collapsed, so too did the wealth of the British elite, the same elite who are still found in the schools built to educate the colonial ruling classes, the same schools that educated the leading Brexiteers and the government members responsible for the referendum and its aftermath. While the wealth of these elite may be diminished, they are still mostly extremely rich. They managed to unite the majority of a populist campaign which pretended that they were against neoliberalism associated with Brussels, but their aim was never to bring back regulations or renationalise the railways. The deregulations they set their sights on were more about good old-fashioned privateering. Like the lauded Elizabethan pirate Francis Drake, the new elite could circumvent the globe, disregarding tax agreements and trade agreements, to build up their own little treasure islands on this green and pleasant land. What is clear from the demographics of those who voted is that the majority of the Leave voters were old, and certainly old enough to have been in a classroom with a map showing the pink parts of the globe which belonged to us. They would have been taught about the spinning jenny, but not about who picked the cotton that the jenny span, or whose land we'd looted to get it. Many of them would have remembered the shameful racism directed at people invited from the former colonies to come and help rebuild our country after the World War, and some may have been shocked by the resurgence in racist hate crime that accompanied the referendum. Britain's hostility towards immigrants isn't new. We have had higher rates of immigration for a much longer period than much of mainland Europe, and one result has been a very multicultural society. London really is the real Big Apple. But we have had a legacy since at least around 1901, 1905 of incredible racist propaganda against each immigrant group, which has been associated with fascism. And this same propaganda was rolled out by the Leave campaign, again about white Europeans, bolstered by our right-wing press and social media. Immigration was raised as an issue because right-wing propagandists didn't want us to talk about rising inequality. They want to tell you that you've got a problem with schools and houses and hospitals and wages, not because the rich have been taking a bigger and bigger share of the pie, but because of immigrants. The wealthy pretend to be interested in levelling up, but that is a sham. In that respect, Britain really is different from its European counterparts. Having entered the Union in 1973 with an equality ranking second only to Sweden, it has steadily slipped to being at the bottom of the table now. It is the only country in Europe where life expectancy fell after 2014. We have nearly the lowest public spending in the whole of Europe as a proportion of GDP. As other European countries work harder than the British to keep low or decrease their levels of homelessness, to maintain decent rent regulations, to ensure that they have lower and faster falling infant mortality rates, we in Britain have often seen the reverse trends. Perhaps it's a lack of funding that meant that schools and the ruling elite couldn't stretch to a few books about the history of Northern Ireland. It's incredible that nobody in the cabinet realised that keeping open the border was now sacrosanct. All the problems that Brexit is now bringing may help serve as a reminder to some and a new lesson to others that we were being led into this mess by people hoping to reboot the British Empire. Empire 2.0 as they called it. Now, when we see the poor getting poorer, maybe we'll realise or begin to realise that it wasn't the immigrants or the EU that had been causing us such misery, but the interests of the few against the many, circling ever inwards